Hi, welcome to the next part of the visual design tutorial. In this video we're going to be talking about vocabulary. I feel like vocabulary is the key to improving your design. Words, the things that people tell you, different ideas, these are all mental tools that we each use to control the outcome of our design. You can use these to help fix and diagnose issues as well as deconstruct other images and designs. So one thing I'd like to talk about too is how well you use these tools and how well you understand them and the different gradient that there is of understanding. So at the bottom we have a sad mess where you don't understand anything, you're not applying any principles, and then we have you're slightly closer, you're like, yeah dude, I know what 70-30 is, and you kinda do it and you kinda understand it, but you really don't. And then we have the guy who can explain how he uses it and why. With purpose and intention, it's being applied, the information is actually being used, it's not just an idea in your head. So you can go past this. I mean, it's a gradient that goes on for eternity, but something to think about. Because I see a lot of people who are like this, and you want to keep pushing to be past the guy in the middle who understands it but doesn't really do it. So, in design, I often like to say that designs must serve some purpose, visual or functional. When we approach a choice, we often pick a design feature or a purpose based on some sort of idea, whether it's functional or visual, right? So, in this case, I'm explaining how I've used vocabulary words to help visualize and then put into action these ideas. So in some places we have asymmetry, echoing, shape contrast, detail distribution, framing, etc. So this is just an example of how I apply these vocabulary words and these principles in a contextual fashion. So the next part of this chapter I'd like to quickly go over is just some vocabulary words that I'm actually not going to be covering in the primary chapters. So the first vocabulary word is transitional element, and it's basically anything that connects or explains the connection or separation between two elements. So for example, when you have a lamp on a desk, okay, so you have the lamp stand and then you have the base. The base is the transitional element between the desk and the stand. So in the same way, I dare you to go look around your room and tell me if you can find any transitional elements, because I promise you will. For example, on my desk right here I have the Wacom pen, and there's a thin piece of metal that goes between the plastic that sits on the table and the table itself. There's usually some kind of border. So just take a look around. It's not a constant thing, but I think it's a great thing to be aware of. Another one of those is form transition. Now, a form transition is how you go from one form to another. So think about how you go from one plane change, shape, form to another and what that looks like. So for example, let's say we have a car and we're transferring from the wheel well to the side of the door. Maybe we'll fade off some sort of sharp bevel that was a part of the wheel well or surrounding the wheel well into the side of the door. These are the types of things that you want to be thinking about. How do I make one form go into another? You know, how do you sculpt the transition between the the knuckle and the rest of the finger? Any type of thing can be seen as a transition when you're going from one form or plane change to another. The next thing I'd like to talk about is just form. At its most basic description, it's a volume and how you convey that volume. Imagine a wireframe on a character. It's where things go outwards or inwards from a surface. Form is the idea, and what we do with it is design. And so I think it's very important that we make this distinction between form and the design of form, because design is taking the idea and making it how we want it, but form is the basic idea. And so you can see in the bottom image of form, it's just showing positive and negative, and you can see by the wireframe that it's showing those different dips and rises. And so this is form at its most basic level. Oftentimes when we're creating complex objects, we will want to mix together different types of forms on different scales. So for example, we have primitives like cylinders, boxy shapes, spherical forms, and then we also have pyramidal. So what we can do is we can mix and play with these things, big scales, small scales, etc. There's unlimited amount of things you can do with form, but I wanted to explain the basic idea. This next one I want to talk about is plane changes. Plane change is a way of describing a change in form and shading. So we can see on the foot here, I'm going to be having a piece of soft, hard plastic, and you can see along the red line, that's where the form is changing. It's going from the tongue of it to the side of it. On the top image, we can see just one plane to another. That line in the middle, to me, is called a plane change. The next one is negative space. Negative space is the space opposing a subject or that breaks into the silhouette. So for example, on the silhouette of the alien creature I created, you can see that the negative spaces are the ones that break the positive space of the main shape. And so to me, negative space is very important when we're thinking about silhouette, but at the same time, it's important to be thinking about what's the opposite of your subject. And so, for example, just to explain negative space further, we have the most typical example, which is where the vase looks like two faces. It's looking at the relationship between what is and isn't there. Silhouette is simply the outline of an object. And to me, I don't think that this is worth going over because all of the design principles we're going to be talking about in this video, you can apply to silhouette. Silhouette is just an idea. So the next one I want to talk about is sandwiching. Sandwiching is when you get a bunch of lines or similar sized elements and they get grouped up and they create an indiscernible mess. It's more applicable to mechanical and sci-fi design, and I see this a lot. A non-descriptive line is a line that isn't constant. It's created using visual elements such as repeating pillars or rocks in a scene to guide the eye. But we can also use what's a line of text, a line of dots. A non-descriptive line is anything that isn't constant but looks like a line. And we can use these in our paintings especially, but also in any other type of design we want to make. The opposite of that is a descriptive line, which is just a line. There's nothing special to it. It's continuous. The next thing I'd like to talk about is visual intensity. Now, visual intensity is very important. It's how strong a particular design element or area is. It is either very intense or subtle. How strong is each of these circles? And if you look, we can see that while the smallest circle is actually probably the strongest thing on the screen, or one of them, because of its color. But then we have a large circle, but because of its value, it's actually very subtle. And so it's very important to be cognizant of what is visually intense in your design and what isn't. And then, I believe the final thing we're going to be talking about in this chapter is value. Value is understanding and controlling your lights and darks in an image, in a design, and that can mean in materials and how light hits the objects, highlights and shadows. Form and value are inseparable, and we can see that we have our value line, which is from dark to white, and then on a sphere, you can see how value defines form. And in that same way, we have a more complicated object, and we can see how when we project a light from below, we're thinking about how we want these values to be. It's very important to be thinking of value on complex objects and when we're designing things. So that concludes it for this chapter. With that said, the next chapter is going to be on how to learn, and then after that, we're going to actually get into the subjects of this tutorial. So I'll see you guys in the next video.